He had the kind of face the camera trusted instantly, and the kind of timing most actors never get. In the early 1990s, Marcus Gilbert seemed to appear at exactly the right moment, when television fame could still feel intimate, and stardom looked like a straight road rather than a gamble. One role made audiences believe they were watching the arrival of a long-term leading man, not just a passing favorite. Industry whispers followed, viewers remembered his name. And for a brief stretch of time, it felt inevitable that Marcus Gilbert was headed somewhere much bigger. But here's the question that refuses to go away. If everything lined up so perfectly, why didn't it last? Why did a man once framed as a future icon slowly slip from the center of attention until his name became something people had to pause and remember? This isn't a story about a scandal or a sudden collapse. It's quieter than that and far more unsettling. Because sometimes careers don't end with explosions, they fade. And when they do, the reasons are rarely obvious. Tonight, we're opening a file that sits in the gray space between success and disappearance, a story shaped by early loss, sudden visibility, near misses, and choices made away from the spotlight. To understand what happened to Marcus Gilbert, we have to start long before fame ever found him, back at the moment that changed how he would face the world forever. Before Marcus Gilbert ever became a name people recognized on television, his life had already been split into a clear before and after. He grew up in England with what looked, from the outside, like a steady and ordinary childhood, family routines, school days, a future that felt predictable in the way only a child's future can. Nothing about those early years suggested fame, and nothing suggested that everything could be taken away so suddenly. That changed when he was 12 years old. A car accident killed his father and his grandparents, and Marcus survived. Survival is often described as luck, but for a child, it can feel like a sentence as much as a gift. From that moment on, life was no longer something that simply happened around him. It became something that could collapse without warning. Loss arrived early, and it arrived violently enough to force maturity long before he was ready for it. What followed wasn't just grief, but adaptation. Children who experience that kind of trauma often learn how to manage their expressions before they learn how to understand their emotions. They become skilled at appearing calm, composed, and fine, even when the internal landscape is anything but. Over time, that ability can look like confidence. It can look like charm. It can even look like natural screen presence. When Marcus later found his way toward acting, those qualities were already there. He didn't need to be taught how to hold himself in front of others or how to project control in emotionally charged moments. He had been practicing those skills for years, just to survive. Acting offered structure where life had once felt chaotic. It offered a way to decide how a story unfolded instead of being trapped inside one he couldn't control. And that's the part most people miss when they look back at his rise. The industry didn't just see a handsome young man with potential. It saw someone who felt unusually settled on camera, someone who seemed ready to carry weight without flinching. That early scar didn't make him famous, but it shaped the kind of presence that fame would later recognize. And as we move forward, it's impossible not to wonder whether that same instinct for emotional self-protection would one day play a role in how easily he could step out of the spotlight when the moment came. By the time Marcus Gilbert reached the early 1990s, the industry already understood something important about him. He didn't just look good on camera. He held the frame. There's a difference. Plenty of actors are attractive. Fewer can project confidence without forcing it, or intensity without shouting. Marcus had that rare combination of polish and edge, the kind that casting directors label instant leading man, because the audience doesn't need to be persuaded. They believe it on sight. Then came the role that locked the image into place, Rupert Campbell Black in the 1993 adaptation of Riders. The character wasn't written to be safe, and that was the risk and the thrill. Rupert was wealthy, privileged, magnetic, and complicated, the type of man the story wants you to watch even when you don't approve of him. In the world of Riders, he moves through status, rivalry, romance, and power like someone who expects doors to open just because he's arrived, and Marcus played that entitlement with a dangerous ease that made the character feel disturbingly real. For viewers, this was the moment. The kind of breakout where an actor stops being a performer and becomes a fantasy, tabloid-friendly, poster-ready, instantly discussable. Riders was loud in the way glossy drama is loud: money, lust, rivalry, adrenaline. And Marcus sat at the center of it, carrying Rupert like a weapon and a wound at the same time. That's why the fame hit fast. Not because audiences had never seen someone like him before, but because he arrived as a complete package: charming, watchable, slightly dangerous, and easy to cast in your head as the next big thing. But this is where the story gets its first quiet twist. Because the same role that launches you can also trap you. A breakout performance doesn't just give you attention, it gives the world a simple label: heartthrob, rogue, leading man. And once that label sticks, every next step has to fight it. You can almost feel it in how people talked about him afterward. Not Marcus the actor, but Marcus as Rupert, as if the role had swallowed the man who played it. And the more iconic the character becomes, the harder it is for the audience to let you be anyone else. So writers gave him 3 gifts: visibility, a signature role, and a public hunger for more. But it also created 3 pressures that are harder to survive: typecasting, expectation, and the cruel industry logic that assumes a breakout will automatically translate into lifelong superstardom. Not everyone makes that jump. Some people become a moment: brilliant, unforgettable, and strangely self-contained. And that's why the next chapter matters so much. Because just when it looked like Marcus Gilbert was lined up for the kind of career that turns a name into a brand, another rumor began to orbit him, one that makes people lean in every single time. After writers stamped Marcus Gilbert as a glossy, dangerous kind of leading man, the conversation around him didn't stay small for long. In the entertainment world, there's a particular kind of rumor that acts like jet fuel, one that instantly upgrades an actor from popular to historic possibility. For Marcus, that rumor was Bond. Not a confirmed casting, not a signed deal, but the kind of industry chatter that follows men who have the right face, the right era, and the right screen temperature. That he was at some point on the radar, considered, discussed, or at least imagined in the orbit of the role that turns actors into global icons. And here's why the almost Bond angle matters, even if it never became reality. Bond isn't just a character, it's a machine. It changes how the public reads you, how studios gamble on you, how the media frames your future. When people say someone was close to that kind of part, what they're really saying is, the industry once looked at them and saw scale. They saw a man who could carry a franchise, a face that could sell confidence worldwide, a presence that could survive pressure. Marcus had the look: clean, classic, camera-ready. He also had something harder to manufacture: that cool restraint that makes a character feel dangerous without needing to raise his voice. But Bond also demands a specific kind of momentum, and momentum is fragile. It's shaped by timing, by the roles you take right after a breakout, by who is championing you behind the scenes, by what the market wants that year, and by what you want as a person when the spotlight starts to feel less like light and more like heat. The truth is, careers can pivot on decisions the audience never sees. One no, one missed meeting, one project that collapses, one performance that lands a little differently than expected. So whether the Bond talk was serious consideration or simply a reflection of how strong his image was at that peak, it still reveals something crucial. Marcus Gilbert was once perceived as a man with a path to the very top. And that makes the next question unavoidable. Because if he had that kind of potential in the public imagination, why didn't the career lock into place afterward? Why did the climb start to feel like a slow, sideways drift instead of a straight ascent? Here's the uncomfortable truth about entertainment. Fame is not a ladder, it's a wave. It lifts you quickly, and then it expects you to keep moving at exactly the speed the public wants, before it loses interest and looks for the next face. After writers, Marcus Gilbert had what most actors crave: recognition, a signature role, and an image that seemed built for bigger things. But superstardom requires more than a breakout. It requires a chain of roles that continuously reintroduce you in new shapes, and an industry willing to keep building around you as trends shift. When that chain breaks, even slightly, the story changes. One reason is the simplest, and also the cruelest: typecasting. When a role becomes too defining, the public begins to cast you in their minds, and producers follow that bias. Marcus was strongly associated with a particular kind of character, handsome, privileged, magnetic, slightly dangerous, and that can narrow opportunities instead of expanding them. Audiences don't always want to watch a heartthrob become ordinary or vulnerable or unglamorous, and the industry, always chasing what sells fastest, often reinforces the most marketable version of you until you feel trapped inside it. The same performance that made people watch him with fascination could also make decision-makers hesitate to see him outside that template. Another reason is timing and the shifting marketplace. The early 1990s were a moment when certain kinds of glossy TV drama had huge cultural power, but the industry changes fast. And when tastes pivot toward different genres, different types of male leads, different storytelling formats, an actor's perfect fit can suddenly look like yesterday's mood. If your next projects don't hit with the same cultural force as your breakout, the narrative becomes, "He peaked," even when you're still working steadily. The audience sees headlines and cultural moments. They don't always see the quiet consistency of a career that continues without the same spotlight. And then there's the factor people underestimate: choice. Not every actor wants the machine that comes with global stardom. Some people are drawn to the craft but allergic to the cost. When you've lived through early trauma, you may be less interested in being owned by public attention. You may value privacy, stability, and control more than constant exposure. The public often interprets that as falling off, when it can also be a deliberate retreat, an attempt to protect a life outside the camera. Even a small shift in priorities can change a career's trajectory, because stardom is not forgiving. The moment you slow down, the industry replaces you. So the real answer to why fame didn't become superstardom is not a single dramatic event. It's a convergence, a role that defined him too sharply, an industry that moves on quickly, and a life that may have demanded something quieter than endless escalation. And that brings us to the most human part of the story, the part that reframes everything we think we know about disappearing. Because away from the roles and rumors, Marcus Gilbert's private life carried its own weight, including a loss that didn't happen on screen, but likely changed everything behind it. When a public figure fades from the headlines, people often assume the story must be professional, bad choices, missed chances, a career that simply didn't work out. But the truth is, careers don't exist in a vacuum. They sit on top of real lives, real responsibilities, and private grief that doesn't care about timing. Marcus Gilbert's personal life included the kind of quiet stability the public rarely sees in full. He was married to Dr. Homa Khan, and they had 2 children together. In a culture that reduces actors to eras and roles, that detail matters, because it suggests that while the public wanted a constant upward climb, he also had a life that required presence, not publicity. Then came a loss that reframes the entire idea of disappearing. Homa Khan died in 2020, and grief like that doesn't announce itself with a premiere date. It doesn't come with a soundtrack. It arrives in the background and changes what ambition feels like, what energy is available, and what kind of attention a person can tolerate. For someone who had already learned early in life what it means to lose family, that kind of moment can reopen old wounds in a way the outside world can't measure. It can make the spotlight feel irrelevant, even intrusive. Later, reports noted that he had reconnected with actress Lisette Anthony, an echo of earlier chapters of his life returning in a gentler, more adult form. And whether that reconnection was brief or deeply meaningful, it points to something important. The later chapters of his story weren't about chasing noise. They were about survival, family, and whatever peace could still be built after loss. This is where the legacy after dark lens matters most, because it reminds us that not every life follows the arc the audience wants. Sometimes a person steps back not because they failed, but because life demanded something more real than fame. Age of 67 after a battle with throat cancer, an ending that feels brutally quiet compared to the glossy rise that first introduced him to the public. There's something sobering about that contrast. A man remembered for charisma, confidence, and leading man magnetism, ultimately facing a private fight that fame can't soften and cameras can't rewrite. In stories like this, it's easy to focus only on the finish line, on the last headline, on the final date. But Marcus Gilbert's legacy isn't just the way he died, it's the way he once made an audience believe instantly that they were watching someone destined for more. And maybe that's the real reason people still search his name. Not because the story is scandalous, but because it leaves a question hanging in the air. How many careers are defined by one unforgettable moment, and how many lives are richer than the public ever realizes when the noise fades? Riders remains the role that many associate him with, a snapshot of an era when television glamour could turn a performer into a cultural fixation overnight. Yet the man behind that role had a longer, quieter journey, one shaped by early tragedy, shifting industry tides, personal loss, and a life that didn't revolve around public validation. The world tends to measure success in volume, constant visibility, constant headlines, constant reinvention. Marcus Gilbert's story suggests a different measurement, one where surviving, choosing privacy, raising a family, and leaving behind even a single iconic performance can still be its own form of permanence. This is Legacy After Dark, where we don't just ask what happened, we ask what remains. And what remains, in Marcus Gilbert's case, is a reminder that fame can be a moment, but impact